Imagine trying to look over your shoulder, but your shoulder is in the way. That's Jay Cutler, a man so built that his own body obstructs his sight lines. And that man, who was literally too massive to see past himself, lost the Mr. Olympia 4 separate times before he ever won it. Jay Cutler, born August 3, 1974 in Sterling, Massachusetts, turned pro at 23 after winning the men's heavyweight nationals in 1996. Standing 5 feet 9 inches and eventually competing at 260 to 270 pounds on stage, he would go on to win the Mr. Olympia 4 times, collect 4 Sandow Trophies at the Las Vegas finals, and build one of the most recognizable physiques in the history of the sport. But none of that is the story. The story is how he got there, and more specifically, how he handled not getting there 4 times in a row. He never complained, never called out the judges, never took shots at Ronnie Coleman in the press. In an era when bodybuilding feuds were magazine fodder and sports media was actively manufacturing enemies, Jay Cutler just kept showing up, kept losing with a dignity so consistent it looked like a system, and kept winning eventually. This is the case for why that system worked. The first time Jay Cutler came close to the Olympia title was 2001. He was 27 years old and had already won the IFBB Night of Champions in 2000, the flagship event now known as the New York Pro, establishing himself as the most dangerous challenger in the IFBB. By the time he arrived at the 2001 Mr. Olympia, he had built a physique serious observers described as the perfect counter to Ronnie Coleman. Where Coleman brought raw, almost grotesque mass density, Cutler brought sculpted symmetry, proportional, tight, every muscle group developed in relation to the others rather than pushed to its individual maximum. At the prejudging round, where judges score mandatory poses before the public finals, Jay Cutler led Ronnie Coleman by 6 points. His own recollection of that moment. Yeah, it's funny because in 2001, I won the Olympia prejudging. I was ahead by 6 points. Guys, I was ahead by 6 points. He wasn't threatening to win. He was winning. Then Coleman came back in the finals, and the 6-point lead evaporated. The final margin went to Coleman by 4 points. Industry observers called Jay's result a controversial second. Coleman himself later described 2001 as his most uncomfortable moment at any Olympia, the year when losing felt genuinely possible for the first time in his reign. Jay had led the prejudging of the most prestigious bodybuilding competition in the world and still walked away second. No public complaint followed, no statement questioning the reversal, just the result on paper and the next training session. Ronnie Coleman was, by any reasonable measure, the greatest competitive bodybuilder of his era. 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles from 1998 through 2005. 26 total IFBB professional titles. At the 2004 Olympia, he weighed in at 296 pounds, a number that only makes sense when you understand that competitive bodybuilders carry that weight at conditioning levels where every pound is visibly striated muscle. Coleman's back was the stuff of textbooks, his legs capable of generating poses that had never been seen before or since at that level. Muscle and Fitness described Jay's situation during the runner-up years plainly. He was indisputably the planet's number 2 bodybuilder. That isn't a compliment with much warmth. It means you are the best person in the world who isn't the best person in the world. Jay didn't compete at the Olympia in 2002. He spent that year at the Arnold Classic instead, the first of 3 consecutive Arnold Classic victories, a record no other bodybuilder in the history of the competition has matched. 3 years in a row at the Arnold Classic wasn't consolation. It was evidence of a man who had found the one stage where he could be ranked first, and used it to build momentum toward the stage where he kept being ranked second. He returned to the Olympia in 2003 and finished second again, as Coleman claimed his 6th Sandow. The 2004 contest brought the margin down to 3 points after the challenge round. Jay's nutritional consultant, Chris Aceto, author of Championship Bodybuilding, and one of the most technically precise dietary programmers in the sport, had spent months calibrating every caloric variable in Jay's preparation. Aceto had worked with top professionals throughout the 1990s before aligning with Cutler, and his role in the operation was the kind of meticulous, scientific approach to diet that complemented Jay's equally meticulous approach to training. All of it produced a physique that lost by 3 points to a man weighing 296 pounds. Venezuelan IFBB professional Gustavo Bedell placed 7th that year, a sign of things slightly reshuffling below the top two, but never threatening the established order. In 2005, Coleman won his 8th consecutive Mr. Olympia title, tying Lee Haney's all-time record in a moment the entire sport had been anticipating for years. Bedell had improved. He moved to 3rd place, collecting $55,000, known for the fullness and roundness in his chest and arms that made him a legitimate top 5 physique in the world. Jay finished 2nd for the 3rd consecutive year, his 4th runner-up finish overall, behind the same man on the same stage in the same city. Jay's stated reflection on those years doesn't read like a man who was suffering. I feel like the fear of losing was what drove me more than anything, and I can honestly admit that. And then, more specifically, if I wasn't chasing Ronnie Coleman, I never would have pushed as hard. I mean, I changed up a lot of my workouts, and I used to watch his DVDs to try. The rival wasn't the enemy. The rival was the standard. There's a meaningful difference between those two framings, and which one you choose says everything about what you'll do with the result of a loss. This silence deserves more attention than it usually gets, because it wasn't passive. The bodybuilding press was actively trying to manufacture a war. Feature spreads speculated on bitter resentment between the two competitors. The magazines, as Jay later pointed out directly, had built this up to kind of hate each other. The industry had commercial incentives for a feud. Subscription-generating conflict between the champion and the perennial challenger generates covers, arguments, and reader investment in ways that mutual professional respect simply doesn't. Jay had every cultural permission to call Coleman out, to imply judging favoritism, to suggest that the IFBB's criteria rewarded raw mass over proportion in ways that systematically disadvantaged his physique type. Other competitors in other sports and other eras have made entire public careers out of lesser grievances. Jay never did any of that. His description of the Coleman dynamic. I think we had respect for each other, but we weren't really necessarily friends. We didn't call each other on the phone. Not enemies, not friends. Mutual professional acknowledgement from a safe distance, with no heat attached. There's a detail from the 2004 pre-Olympia preparation that crystallizes this entire dynamic. Coleman and Cutler trained together in the weeks before competing against each other. Same environment, same space. Two men who would stand on stage within weeks, fighting for the same title, sharing a gym and assessing each other's conditioning side by side. That image tells you more about the nature of this rivalry than any magazine editorial ever did. They weren't performing hatred for an audience. They were two professionals who understood they were in the same business. The absence of trash talk wasn't accidental and wasn't simply a personality trait, though it was certainly consistent with who Jay appeared to be. It was strategically coherent. Complaining about judges redirects energy away from the preparation that changes results. Attacking your rival publicly gives them material, hands the narrative to people outside your control, and invites a retaliatory cycle that benefits neither competitor and helps only the people selling the conflict. Staying silent keeps the focus on the one variable Jay could actually change: what he brought to the stage. He placed second 4 consecutive times to the same man. He never complained 4 consecutive times. Those two facts aren't a coincidence. When you have no control over judging decisions, no control over what your rivals are building, and no control over the commercial interests of the press, the only rational investment is in what you can control. Jay Cutler built his career on exactly that equation. The contemporaneous Flex magazine War of Words feature on the Coleman-Cutler rivalry characterized Jay as having took each loss in stride, and that observation was made while the rivalry was actively ongoing, not as a retrospective tribute. Journalists watching the competition unfold in real time noticed what he wasn't doing, because what he wasn't doing was conspicuous. September 29th to 30th, 2006, the Orleans Arena, Las Vegas. Ronnie Coleman was 42 years old, defending his 8th consecutive Olympia title. Jay Cutler had come to this stage as runner-up in 2001, 2003, 2004, and 2005, as Arnold Classic champion 3 years running, and as the one bodybuilder every serious industry observer acknowledged was operating at Coleman's level and losing by margins that, year after year, had been shrinking rather than growing. Jay came in carrying the physique he had been refining across a full decade of professional preparation, the symmetry he'd always brought, now with added density from a decade of refinement and the experience of 6 prejudging rounds at the most competitive bodybuilding stage in the world. Coleman brought the full Coleman package, but at 42, something was beginning to shift. The two competed through prejudging and finals over those 2 Las Vegas nights, and when the result came down, Jay Cutler had won his first Mr. Olympia title. Coleman finished second. 8 consecutive years of dominance ended in the city where they'd all been decided. Flex magazine documented the Sandow Trophy presentation with Lee Haney, the man who had set the 8-win record Coleman had just tied, in attendance as Jay gave his acceptance speech to thousands of fans inside the Orleans arena. What Jay said afterward about the man he'd just beaten, "I didn't beat the best Ronnie Coleman ever. I was just better that day." Not a declaration of supremacy, not a dismissal of what Coleman had built, a calibrated, honest acknowledgement that he had won this version of a rivalry that both men had fought with full commitment, and that the result didn't diminish what had come before it. Jay gave Coleman his full due at the precise moment of his own greatest triumph. That is either very smart or very decent, and the honest answer is probably both, and in this case, they're pointing in the same direction. Coleman's response was its own kind of grace. A photograph from that period shows Coleman, 8-time champion, arguably the greatest bodybuilder in history, carrying Jay Cutler on his back after the loss. Not bitterness, not resentment, a physical gesture of respect from one competitor to another. Both men understood what the other had done. Both men had been building toward this result, in their separate ways, for years. 2007 is where this gets complicated. This is the segment that earns the rest of the argument. Because the only way to build trust with an audience that knows this history is to say plainly what happened, rather than spin the story around the most forgiving frame available. Jay came into the 2007 Mr. Olympia as the defending champion, but he came in sick, not slightly under the weather, badly ill from a serious infection that disrupted his conditioning in ways any competitive bodybuilder will confirm are catastrophic at the Olympia level. By the time he stepped on stage for prejudging, Iron Man magazine reported he was terribly sick. His contest weight came in at approximately 260 pounds, roughly 15 pounds lighter than his 2006 winning weight. The illness had visibly smoothed his upper body conditioning, robbing him of the sharp, dry detail that separates winning-level physiques from almost winning-level physiques at the Mr. Olympia. By his own account, mid-morning on the day of finals, he was seriously considering withdrawing from the contest entirely. He didn't withdraw. He went out and competed anyway. Across the stage from him stood Victor Martinez. Martinez had arrived at that 2007 contest in the shape of his career. A Dominican-born IFBB professional standing 5 feet 9 inches and competing at approximately 265 pounds, his measurements that year read like a structural argument for first place. 20-inch arms, a 60-inch chest, a 32-inch waist. The V-taper, the shoulder-to-waist ratio that judges score heavily, was among the most dramatic the Olympia stage had seen in years. His conditioning was hard and detailed. His muscle bellies were full and round, without sacrificing separation. Martinez had spent years building toward this. His career had been interrupted by a prior incarceration, and Ronnie Coleman himself had reportedly predicted that Victor Martinez would be the next man to hold the Olympia title after his own run ended. Milo Sarcev, one of the most technically respected coaches the sport has produced, and a former IFBB professional competitor, appeared on Jay's own podcast years later to discuss that night. He didn't soften his assessment. He told Jay directly, "Victor had a more dramatic V-taper at that time, and he was very wide, just like you, comparably. Shape. He had these round muscle bellies, right? Everything was there. When you turn the lights on now, look at condition. His conditioning was actually a little better than yours." Then Sarcev delivered his verdict. "If I was a judge, you'd be fourth. Not second, not close. Fourth." He continued, Hold on. Victor Martinez, Dennis Wolf, and Dexter Jackson all beat you." He called the result, in those precise words, a gift. Sarcev isn't a forum commenter. He's a man who has built IFBB-level champions for decades, whose technical reading of muscle conditioning, structure, and proportion is taken seriously by the people who actually compete at this level. His analysis wasn't revisionist. The evidence at the time pointed the same direction. Sean Ray, the co-MC at the 2007 contest, placed Jay fourth in his own assessment of that night, the same number Sarchev arrived at independently. Ironman magazine ran a reader poll immediately following the show. Victor Martinez received 46% of votes to Jay Cutler's 32%. The scoring margin itself, depending on which source you trust, was somewhere between 1 point and 4. Both figures describe a result so narrow it functionally can't be called decisive. Victor Martinez has stated publicly, "Judges didn't even look at me." He would later make a more inflammatory accusation, suggesting Jay had used his influence to arrange the outcome through some form of agreement with Olympia authorities. That specific claim has no documented corroboration in the public record, and there's a meaningful distinction between the judging was wrong and the result was fixed. The first of those accusations is well supported by the available evidence. The second isn't. Jay Cutler was announced the winner of the 2007 Mr. Olympia. He collected his second Sandow Trophy. The honest accounting of that night? Jay competed while significantly compromised by a serious illness, came in approximately 15 pounds lighter than his winning weight from the previous year, and still finished close enough to the result that the margin, across multiple credible assessments, was either 1 or 4 points. Victor Martinez brought a physically superior package to that stage by the technical measures serious observers applied both in the room and in the years of analysis that followed. The judging appears to have rewarded an established champion at a moment when the physical evidence, presented cold, arguably favored the challenger. The community has formed its own consensus on this, and across the bodybuilding fan base, virtually no one defends the 2007 result on purely physical grounds. 0. That's not a rhetorical flourish. That's the actual state of the debate. Jay's public response to Sarchev's analysis was a single sentence: "You weren't qualified to be a judge." It's worth parsing what that response is and what it isn't. It challenges the source's credentials. It doesn't argue that the result was correct on the evidence. It doesn't claim the judging was clean. Jay didn't mount a physical defense of his 2007 conditioning against Sarchev's description of it. He deflected to a procedural challenge, which is a very different maneuver, one that tells you Jay understood exactly the conversation he was in and chose not to engage with its substance. After that exchange, he said nothing further about it publicly, kept training, and went back out the following year. Same system, same silence, different preparation. 2008 gave Jay a cleaner loss, which in some ways was probably easier to absorb. Dexter Jackson, the Blade, an IFBB professional whose conditioning was almost preternatural, lean to a degree that consistently made larger competitors look soft by comparison, came in sharper than everyone on the stage at the 2008 Mr. Olympia. He had won the 2008 Arnold Classic that same year and brought the same package to Las Vegas in September. The industry called it a stunning upset, but Jackson had been competing against Jay for years, and both men understood the field. Jay finished second. His public framing afterward placed accountability on himself, making sure he never gave the judges a reason to vote against him. Not blaming the system, not citing the conditions, adjusting within the competition as it existed. The 2009 Mr. Olympia produced something the modern era had never seen. Jay Cutler won it back. He became the first Mr. Olympia in modern bodybuilding history to lose the title as a reigning champion and then reclaim it the following year. The historical record requires one qualification here. Arnold Schwarzenegger came out of a multi-year retirement in 1980 to win his 7th title in Sydney, Australia. A comeback, yes, but a structurally different one. Arnold had been away from competition for 4 or 5 years before he returned. Jay lost in October 2008 and reclaimed in September 2009. He didn't return from retirement. He absorbed the defeat, rebuilt his preparation over a single competition cycle, and beat the man who had beaten him. No one had accomplished that in the modern era of the sport, and no one has done it since. What the 2009 win required, practically speaking, was an act of sustained focus that most athletes never manage. The competitive psychology of returning to a stage where you've been beaten, facing competitors who have had an entire year to study your weaknesses, in a sport where the physical preparation alone requires 6 months of near monastic dedication to diet, training, and recovery, that's the context. Jay walked back into that environment with backstage confidence his own words confirm. "When I went into that show, I said, I'm going to win the Mr. Olympia. I had already won everything that—" He came back, as the coverage described it, with a vengeance. His third Sandow is arguably the most meaningful win on his record, purely because of what it required. Losing the thing you spent a decade earning, absorbing that loss without public complaint, and then building the physical answer to a question the sport had never previously seen answered. The 2010 Mr. Olympia completed the 4-championship run and delivered Jay's 4th and final Sandow Trophy. Phil Heath, the rising competitor the industry had been tracking as the next generation's answer to Jay's generation, finished second. Their first head-to-head 1-2 finish at the Olympia. Jay's win came at a severe physical price. In his preparation, he had cut his water intake so aggressively that his body nearly shut down backstage. Reports from that period documented a 45-minute recovery ordeal after he left the stage before his system normalized. He had pushed preparation to a physiological edge, won the title, and very nearly paid for it in a way that had nothing to do with judging. That was his 4th championship, and, counting the 2008 and 2011 runner-up finishes, his 6th overall second-place finish at the Mr. Olympia. More runner-up finishes at that contest than any competitor in its history. A brief note on Phil Heath, because it matters for understanding who Jay Cutler is away from the competitive stage. At the 2011 Mr. Olympia, Phil Heath took his first Sandow Trophy, ending Jay Cutler's reign and beginning what would become a 7 consecutive title run. At the post-competition press conference, held 34 hours after the show by one account, Jay stood beside the man who had just beaten him, shoulder to shoulder. Flex magazine described him at that moment as Phil Heath's close friend and mentor, grinning. Jay had given this man genuine guidance and friendship at the highest level of their shared profession, during the years when Jay was the 4-time defending champion and Phil was the rising challenger. When that relationship produced the outcome where the student surpassed the teacher, Jay didn't turn cold or pull back. He stood at the press conference and smiled. Phil Heath would hold that title until 2017. Jay had helped build that foundation. The competitor he mentored became the man who unseated him, and Jay was standing beside him, grinning at the press conference. That image, documented, witnessed by the industry, captured in print, isn't a footnote. It's a character exhibit. It's the same behavior, expressed in a different context than the losses to Coleman. When the result didn't go Jay's way, he found a way to engage with what was genuinely good about it. 4 losses to Coleman, a smile when Heath beat him. The pattern is consistent enough that calling it a strategy versus calling it a personality feels like a distinction without a real difference. Jay Cutler's final Olympia appearance came in 2013, where he placed 6th, his last competitive stage. He left the sport without a bitter public statement, without a manifesto about what the judging owed him, without recriminations about his legacy or demands for recognition he felt had been withheld. He retired by his own framing because the passion for the preparation had left him. Not because judges had wronged him, not because a rival had taken something he was owed. A loss of passion and motivation toward the sport was how he characterized it. That's an athlete who competed on his own terms until his own terms changed, then stopped competing. Clean exit. He built Cutler Nutrition into an active supplement brand that remains in operation. He hosts the Cutler Cast podcast alongside Matt Jansen. He carries 3.5 million followers on Instagram. He received the Arnold Classic Lifetime Achievement Award. He makes guest posing appearances at events around the world. The industry kept him at its center not because he demanded a platform, but because 2 decades of competing with dignity had made him genuinely irreplaceable as a figure, not just as a champion, but as a functional model for how to conduct yourself across a long career in a brutally competitive sport. Now consider what Jay Cutler looks like at 51. Born August 3rd, 1974. Still training, still carrying visible muscle density that most men at 30 don't achieve. Bodybuilding and fitness media covered his physique in August 2024 in terms normally reserved for active professionals, not retired competitors in their 6th decade. He no longer chases 250-plus pounds on the scale. He said directly in a 2024 interview that he's making changes to stay lean and muscular without the extreme protocols that competitive preparation demands. No more of the water cutting that nearly shut his body down backstage after the 2010 championship. No more of the grinding, body-threatening preparation cycles that competitive bodybuilding requires. Smart training, consistent nutrition, quality sleep, health-focused supplementation. His stated goals have shifted from maximum mass to longevity, from what the scale shows to what the body can sustain over decades. A YouTube video from 2024 captures him noting that he avoids specific foods to maintain his condition, and that the discipline he applies now is oriented around not getting old rather than around winning. He's still getting returns on investments made in his 20s. That's not maintenance, that's compounding. The contrast with Ronnie Coleman requires no editorial embellishment, and the respectful way to present it's with the numbers and Coleman's own words rather than interpretive framing. Coleman, by his own direct count, has undergone 15 surgeries. His own statement: "The total number of surgeries I have had is 15. There was a point when I had to undergo 3 surgeries in a single year." He has navigated hotel corridors on crutches, the direct physical legacy of training decisions made during 8 consecutive championships that included squatting weights that the human spine wasn't designed to bear. He made a public promise to walk without crutches again within 18 months. The man who won more consecutive Olympia titles than anyone in the sport's history is engaged in the project of rebuilding basic locomotion. Jay has spoken about Coleman's situation publicly, and his response is telling. What strikes him most, by his own account, isn't the injuries or the surgeries or the physical diminishment. It's that Coleman never makes excuses for what happened. That's admiration. Not quiet satisfaction at outlasting his greatest rival. Not comparison-making designed to flatter himself. Admiration for a man who accepts the consequences of his own choices without complaint. The exact same quality Jay demonstrated across his own competitive career. He recognizes in Coleman the thing he built in himself, operating under circumstances far harder than the ones Jay faced. That's a generous reading of a man's suffering, and generosity in that context is the mark of someone who spent 2 decades building character rather than grievance. The post-career divergence between these two men is real and documented, and it reflects genuine differences in how they approach their bodies during competition, not just in the results. Jay competed at 260 to 270 pounds at peak condition. Coleman competed at 296. Jay prioritized symmetry within his mass. Coleman prioritized maximum mass above every other variable. Those choices have consequences that compound over decades. The comparison isn't designed to diminish what Coleman achieved. It's designed to illustrate that Jay's approach to his body, like his approach to his competitors, turned out to have long-term returns that weren't visible in the short term. The full competitive count: second place in 2001, 2003, 2004, and 2005 behind Ronnie Coleman. Second place in 2008 to Dexter Jackson. Second place in 2011 to Phil Heath. 6 runner-up finishes at the Mr. Olympia, the most in the history of that contest. 4 Sandow Trophies: Las Vegas 2006, Las Vegas 2007, Las Vegas 2009, Las Vegas 2010. The math is symmetrical in a way that feels almost designed, though obviously no one designed it. It's what happens when you compete at the highest level for long enough, without losing your composure, your focus, or your willingness to keep showing up after the result goes wrong. The more remarkable number in that record is 0. 0 documented instances of Jay Cutler publicly criticizing IFBB judges after a loss. 0 recorded attacks on Ronnie Coleman, Victor Martinez, or Dexter Jackson in the press during his competitive career. 0 bitter exits, 0 scorched earth retirement interviews, 0 statements organized around grievance. In a sport where manufactured conflict is commercial product, where magazines profit from feuds and social media rewards the loudest outrage, Jay Cutler's public record across more than a decade at the elite level is nearly empty of complaint. The Flex War of Words feature on the Coleman-Cutler rivalry captured it contemporaneously. Runner-up 4 times to Coleman, but took each loss in stride. That's not a retrospective tribute. That's journalists watching the competition unfold in real time and noting the absence of fire. None of this rewrites 2007. The honest position on that year: Victor Martinez brought a better physique to the Olympia stage than the defending champion. The scoring was narrow enough to be disputed regardless of exact margin, The co-MC placed Jay fourth. The industry poll had Martinez winning by nearly 15 points, and Milos Sarchev's detailed technical analysis, delivered on Jay's own podcast, To Jay's Own Face, put Jay outside the top 3. The judging gave Jay the title. The community has never fully accepted the result, and this isn't the place to argue they should. The 2007 Sandow is the complicated Sandow, and calling it that is the honest thing to do. What Jay said about it afterward, publicly and on record, amounts to one sentence challenging Sarchev's credentials. He didn't claim the result was clean. He didn't apologize for it either. He moved forward and won 2 more titles across the following 3 years. The shoulder joke is the accessible version of this story. Jay Cutler is so massive, his own traps obstruct his sight lines, and the image lands because it's technically accurate. The man's upper body development is the kind of extreme that produces exactly that physical limitation. But the more useful observation is this. Most people, when they can't see what's behind them, spend enormous energy looking backward, wondering what they missed, whether the last result was fair, whether they're owed something that hasn't been paid, sourcing their next move from what went wrong rather than from what needs to happen next. Jay Cutler's career suggests he didn't do that. He led the 2001 prejudging by 6 points and got reversed in the finals. Said nothing. Finished second 4 times behind the greatest bodybuilder of his era. Said nothing inflammatory, framed Coleman as the standard rather than the enemy. Won the 2007 title in arguably his worst competitive condition. Deflected the most credible critique rather than engage with it, then moved forward. Lost the title in 2008. Placed accountability on himself. Won it back in 2009. Became the only man in the modern era to do it. Helped the man who would eventually beat him, then grinned at that man's press conference. Retired clean, built a brand, stayed in the sport on his own terms. 4 Sandow Trophies in Las Vegas. 6 runner-up finishes. 0 trash talk on record. And then, while other legends of his era undergo their 3rd and 8th and 15th surgeries, Jay Cutler at 51 is still the physique. Not the trophy someone handed him, the physique he built, maintained, and refused to destroy. The same discipline that produced 4 championships is the reason he looks the way he looks today. Because it was never just a competition strategy. It was a philosophy about how to occupy a body and a career over a lifetime. The man who never said anything bad ended up winning the longest game of all. Subscribe for more stories like this.